So the 21st century is here, and it's probably time that we started preparing students for it. In fact, it's already 11% over, right? So it's been at least a decade. We're still talking about maybe possibly trying to get students so-called 21st century skills. It's probably time that we move a little faster on this stuff. Uh, Schools essentially have two big challenges ahead of them. The first one is to live above the red line more often. What do I mean by that? I mean that perhaps the most important thing that schools need to do, at least in the developed world, is to live on the upper end of Bloom's taxonomy, right? That those low-level factual recall and procedural knowledge just doesn't have much economic value, and to be honest, is often rather boring. In an era where you can find all of that stuff online in just a few seconds. And so, I've juxtaposed these two pyramids on purpose to show that in the developed world, what really justifies paying that salary and wage premium is the stuff on the upper end of the pyramids, the creative work, the non-routine, more abstract cognitive work that justifies our standard of living. And let's be honest, living up there is also usually more engaging for students and for teachers as well. So we get a lot of other academic benefits of it besides. It's not just an economic argument. The second big challenge that we have, of course, is that as we're living and doing education in this different way, where we're spending a greater percentage of our time up on the upper end of the pyramid with these higher order thinking skills, is how do we pull these digital technologies that are transforming everything, that are creating this new information landscape, that are destroying major segments of society. How do we pull these tools into that learning and teaching process in ways that are meaningful and powerful? Of course, we move quite slow in education, right? So we have this model where we get a few teachers on board this year and a few more on board next year. We'll buy a few laptops this year and a few more next year, hoping we can finally get a classroom set. And, there's this big frickin' wall in the way between where we are and where we need to be, because we move so slowly that by the time we get to where we need to be, where that desired destination is, and that's maybe an if, not a when, because often we never get there. But let's say we do get there. The new desired destination is out further to the right now because society changes that much faster than school systems do. Of course, the problem is that we're trying to make incremental evolutionary changes in an exponential revolutionary environment. And we have to figure out somehow, how do we break through the wall, leapfrog over the wall, tunnel under the wall, burrow through the wall, something that lets us change at a faster pace. We need to be much more forward-thinking than we are now. Instead of looking toward the future, many of us are still focused on compliance with government mandates and so on, and we're losing the forest for the trees. We're always going to need teachers, but I think it's also very clear to say that teaching is going to look a lot different. It's going to be more technology mediated. More teaching is going to occur online than we thought was possible. More learning and teaching is going to occur in simulations and games and through robust learning software that sits side by side with the teacher in the classroom than we thought was possible. So some of these cognitive functions and teaching functions that we thought humans had to do, live human beings in front of live students, we're finding that that's not the case. The schools that are adapting best to this paradigm are the ones that are taking charge of their own fates. And in other words, they're not waiting around for more resources. They're not waiting for the political climate to change or to somehow get more support from their local community. They're figuring out how to make things happen with the resources that they have. They're reallocating, they're repurposing, they're reassigning, they're rethinking, and they're creating new kinds of learning environments with existing resources by repurposing and changing existing resources and funding streams and so on. So every day as an educator, you're going to have this chance. You can either this choice, you can make a decision that reinforces the status quo and just delays you and your students one day further from moving in the directions that you need to go, or you can dream bigger. You can start building the new system that we know we need. And I think at least personally, I think the times really demand that we dream much bigger than we are now. We're still thinking of incremental evolutionary changes where we're going to take the current model of school and we're simply going to plug a few more computers into it, or a couple digital cameras. And that's not really what we're talking about. We're talking about creating a completely new educational landscape that better fits the completely new information and economic landscapes that we now operate in. We can't somehow pretend that the previous schooling model, which is created for a very different era, is somehow, with a few tweaks, with a few modifications, is somehow going to be satisfactory for today's day and age. You're not going to have many resources. You're not going to have time. You're going to be undertrained. You're going to be under-resourced. You're not going to get the kind of financial supports or political supports that you want. And again, the task still remains. The bottom line is that whether you like it or not, we're supposed to be preparing kids for their own future. And that's the challenge, is that, one of the biggest barriers to the kind of change we need is our mindsets about what school should look like. If you ask people, what should school be over the next 3 or 4 decades, they'll tell you it should look like what it did over the last 3 to 4 decades, because that's what it looked like when I went to school. Hey, I turned out okay, and so on. But everything is reshaping itself. We're seeing significant shifts in society. People are staying unemployed for long periods of time. They can't find work, or they're finding lower paid work than they would like, because bottom line is that they don't have the skills for the new era. We need more of our people who can do upper level work. Lauren Resnick, a cognitive psychologist in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, has said that schools have always trained the few elite students to be thinkers. Those are traditionally our college-going crew and so on. It's a very different thing to say that most or maybe all of our kids should now be thinkers. That's a very different problem and requires very different kinds of school systems. Nobody wants schools to be irrelevant. And yet, if we continue on the path we're going, if we don't somehow radically reshape what we do relatively quickly, those disconnects between what society needs, what families need, what our kids need, and what schools are doing, those gaps and those disconnects are simply going to continue to increase. So buckle up. The journey of the next 1,000,000 miles is ahead of us. I wish you all the best of luck in your own teaching journeys, or at least recognize the larger picture that surrounds what you do and what you're going to do as educators. And stay in touch as I can be of help. Thank you very much.